Good morning and welcome back to the VIP seat. Today is August 6th. I'm your co-host, Jessie Naor, here with our co-host, Preston Holland. Preston, it's been, again, a busy week. Thought it wasn't going to be crazy, but we've got some M&A stuff going on. Joby purchasing Blade, so much to talk about today.
Yeah, there's a lot of M&A news that really I haven't seen a lot of chatter about it. The Blade Joby has been talked about a lot, but the rest of the M&A activity that's been going on, not a lot of activity. For those listeners and readers of the newsletter that are wondering, today's Wednesday. Why am I listening to the VIP seat on Wednesday and not on Tuesday? Unfortunately, both co-hosts were feeling under the weather yesterday. You might be able to hear it in my nose. So sorry that we're a day late. We do come out on Tuesdays typically, but if you like Wednesdays more, send us a note and let us know what you think.
Yeah, we didn't want our, bad mood to come across in the podcast. So we're healthy today and back at it, which is great. But
Yeah, absolutely.
let's start this show off. Before we get into the really interesting hot takes on the M&A front, we got to talk about Paris Hilton because she is literally sliving it, as she likes to say, in her brand new G450. Of course it's pink. Of course it's hot on the winglets. This thing is actually pretty awesome.
Yeah, I am pretty impressed with whoever designed this. It is a one of one, that is for sure. It is very pink. I will say this is not my style personally, but good for her for having an absolute pink explosion on this Jeep.
Yes, the designer was, and I'm probably going to murder this name, and I'm sorry in advance, Sarah Mesfeld Larrañaga? Larrañaga. I'm not sure. But anyway,
You come to the VIP seat for your pronunciations of hard to say last names.
Hablo un poco español, but that one's beyond my abilities. So, but it's very pink. It includes 7 different shades of pink can be set in the controller while she's on board. It's got Starlink. The bottom of the airplane says sliving it. Let's keep sliving it. Sliving it, for those who don't know, is to slay and also living your life to its fullest. So I'd say she's doing a pretty good of sliving it. Done by Standard Aero in Illinois. So shout out to them for making a really hot airplane.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it has Aristo leather inserts called Sparkle Custom Quilt, pink piping, and embossed logos, Paris for her seat, and Sliv Air for family and guests on the headrest. So, what that tells you is there is a VIP seat on Paris Hilton's jet, and it says Paris. So don't sit in it unless you're chartering it, and then maybe you can. I don't know if you can charter it, but if you could, I would be sitting in Paris's seat.
Well, and this is a birthday gift from her husband, entrepreneur Carter Room. So I'm just going to remind my husband, who watches the show as well, that my birthday is coming up in about a month. And I don't have to have a custom interior. Totally fine with a white blank factory paint job, just to save a little bit. It's totally fine.
Yeah, Dan, if you're listening, give the lady what she wants. So the paint scheme beforehand, if you go to the Rob Report story, which we'll link in the newsletter, you can actually see the before and after. The before was pretty standard, it's pretty mediocre, but afterwards, I mean, it's really something.
Yes. So yeah, pretty fabulous for Paris though, because I don't think, some standard tail is going to do it for her. She needs pink and glitter and everything interesting.
It's a pretty standard millennial thing. As someone who is on the tail end of the millennials, I can make that joke. So congratulations to Paris Hilton on your G450. Congratulations to the management company, whoever you are that's out there. We weren't able to use JetNet to look up who actually purchased or who is actually the management company of record because we don't know the tail number. But if you find it out, drop us a note, look it up on JetNet, and be sure to search that. So it's the great part about JetNet is you can actually see the management company of record inside of there. So whoever you are, congratulations on having a beautiful pink new jet in your hangar.
And before we get into the serious M&A stuff, which is going to be a long conversation, I think it's time for our social media madness segment. Preston, do you want to go first?
I do. I want to give another shout out to, this is actually a callback to last week's episode. If you watched last week, you will remember that Gary Dunn posted an image of the Blue Angel sign that said basically, what's it like living in Seattle? And it's basically a whole lot of hate for the Blue Angels. Gary actually posted a follow-on story with his history. He sent me a DM. Gary, thanks for listening to the show and thanks for sending me that note. This is a quick follow-on to that. I saw this on X And our listeners know already that Preston always brings the X stories. So this is David Rosen. It is copyrighted by him, Slick Six Photography. So no credit taken to us. But he actually got this photo of the Blue Angels flying over the sign. So the sign that says, for those that are listening on audio, the sign says, "Say no to Blue Angels, too loud, war trauma, pollution." Has a lot of people covering their ears, very upset. And he actually got a picture of the Blue Angels flying in formation over that sign. This is legendary. So David Rosen, congratulations on capturing that photo. If you want to use it, be sure to license it and all of that good stuff. But shout out to David. This is a legendary photo.
This might become just a thing as part of the Blue Angels show in Seattle. People are going to start putting up billboards all over the place for and against jet noise. I like it. Let's keep it going. It's funny.
Yeah. The VIP seat, if any sponsors are out there and you'd like to sponsor a VIP seat, we like the jet noise billboard in Seattle for next year. Drop us a line. We would be happy to co-brand that.
We'll take care of it. All right, so for my Mile High Madness segment of the week, for those who don't know, I have a farm and I love farm animals. So this one speaks not only to my love of private jets, but also to farm animals, including this beautiful little cow named Sophia, who was flying on Tradewind Aviation last week. I'm not really sure what the story is here, but I think she's the cutest passenger that's ever been on a private jet. And I love her and I want a cow, including a private jet. I've got a lot of requests for my birthday this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, my wife also occasionally catches the show, and this is going to be her favorite part, is the tiny cow that is getting on the PC-12. That is the beauty of the Pilatus PC-12, folks, is you can not only load people and crew and golf clubs, but you can also load cows.
Your baby cows. And I was trying to figure out like what kind she was. I'm pretty sure she's she's either a mini belted Galloway or she's some sort of Highland mix with a panda color coding. But this cow can go for like $10,000 to $15,000, just so you know. This is no like run of the mill mini cow. But obviously she has a mother who loves her and wants to fly her privately, which is wonderful.
Yeah, based on DOCs and how much those cows go for, if that flight was over about 2-ish hours, the price of that cow just doubled. So there we go.
Well, speaking of prices doubling and what things are worth, it's been a pretty wild M&A week. We have to start this segment out with, and as always, this show is for entertainment purposes only. We are not financial advisors. We're not giving financial advice. We talk about publicly traded companies, but we are commentators trying to entertain you. So do not misconstrue this as financial advice at all.
This is for fun. Welcome to M&A Corner. We need like some intro music. If there's an audience member out there that is very musically inclined and you want to make a little intro theme for M&A Corner, send it to us. We want to see it. Or if you're really good at using AI and you want to make an AI music intro for M&A Corner, send it to us.
Yes, but the talk of the town right now is that Joby Aviation has acquired Blade Urban Air Mobility.
Not all of it. Just some of it. To be clear, it's not all of it. And that's the crazy part.
Yeah, this thing, there's so much to unpack here. First of all, the big headline was saying that it's worth $125 million. The sale is up to $125 million, which would represent a 20x on... Actually, it's not even a 20x because I don't think they have positive EBITDA in the first place. So that's confusing. Second of all, apparently only $80 million of it is in closing consideration. $10 million is in a holdback, another 17.5 is earnouts, and another 17.5 is related to employee retention. So 125 is a certain number, but it's also, you need to break that down a little bit. Also, not necessarily cash. Joby can do all of this in a stock trade as well as cash. So not really sure how that's all going to pan out.
Yeah, and then you have to start thinking about the different common shares versus preferred shares and how does all of that transfer. There's a lot of math, and there is, you know who the big winner in all of this is? Goldman Sachs, or whoever the investment banker was that put this deal together. They are the big winners here because that's going to be a lot of fees to figure this thing out. To be clear, so Blade had previously announced partnerships and provisional orders with eVTOL aircraft developers Eve Air Mobility and Beta Technologies. I remember when both of those were announced. Blade will directly involved in its effort to launch commercial passenger services in Dubai next year. And basically what they did was they took the eVTOL passenger division, which, mind you, is not flying any passengers. So they're buying relationships, they're buying go-to-market strategy in the eVTOL business and carving that out of Blade, and they bought that. They left the rest of it. The rest of that stays behind. So their organ transplant business, which is not insignificant, their helicopter passenger business, and they also have a fixed wing brokerage that's also associated with kind of the whole Blade brand. So it really peeled out just the piece that hasn't existed yet. And I think it's a smart move by Joby because they're able to kind of, if you think about what Tesla's doing, they're taking a very similar strategy in the direct to consumer kind of manufacturer, taking out the, Ford makes cars, they don't necessarily operate taxis, right? They're kind of taking that part out, taking a little bit out of the Elon Musk playbook where you see Tesla and Austin starting to kind of have their ride sharing app. So they're really trying to buy that quote unquote direct to consumer piece. The thing that I think is very curious is that there's not really a business. Like I would totally get that if they were buying something that was already flying passengers on eVTOLs, but that's not existing yet.
Well, see, I'm confused because the way I read it was they are taking the helicopter passenger business, and maybe I like totally missed that. But I mean, it's talking about the urban sites that they have, which are just leases. They have leases at JFK, West 30th Street Heliport. They've got lounges and other things in Europe. But again, those are not owned properties. Those are lease properties. So I guess it's kind of turnkey from a branding perspective. Once Joby has an eVTOL ready to launch, they've got these bases that already have the Blade name. I assume there's an application that people will be able to book things on. But what I find a little confusing here is that Blade has always been a broker. Blade is not, operator of aircraft. The CEO, Rob Wiesenthal, is going to be the CEO of Joby's Blade product. But again, I don't know. He doesn't necessarily have an operator background. This was a brokerage that they're purchasing. So it's just kind of confusing. At first I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is a really, really good deal for Blade because they've had this like loss leader for years and someone's going to come along and give them $125 million for it. But Joby also isn't anywhere near profitability. I don't know. I don't know who's winning or losing, like you said, except for other than the bankers and the attorneys who wrote the agreements.
Yeah, no kidding. And to correct the record from previously, you are correct in the passenger piece, but they did leave behind. The big part is leaving behind the organ business.
The organ business,
which we have reported on previously was what was keeping Blade afloat to begin with. Like the whole reason that they were able to reduce their net losses was because of that organ business. And there's this, I think, unspoken, there's an AIN article. There's a lot of coverage on this story. So we'll be sure to link all of those in the newsletter. But as we kind of distill it all down, there's a lot of ways in which they're remaining separate companies, yet there's a unspoken agreement that if you're going to move organs with eVTOLs, then Blade will use Joby eVTOLs and not other eVTOLs. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. Blade flew more than 50,000 passengers in helicopters last year, 2024. Trips included flights using dedicated bases at JFK and Newark, as well as using helicopters in Manhattan. So they were a helicopter business. They were trying to get the actual go to market. So now Joby gets that part. So people use Blade. So that is good. And if you take that down, so you have 50,000 passengers and they paid $175 million. Let's do some quick math. I'm not going to do that math in my head live on the show. I know better. But we're going to take 50,000 passengers. You're paying $350 per passenger? I think that's right.
Okay. I trust you.
Yeah. Let me see if I'm missing a zero. No, I'm missing a zero. $3,500 per passenger. So if you break it down as Joby buying people who are used to using a service, and you break that down to 50,000 passengers in helicopters in 2024, they're paying $3,500 customer acquisition cost. it kind of starts it back. The math kind of backs out a little bit, right? I mean, that's not insane if you're going to get 50,000 people to use your service a couple of times. And if eVTOL really does drive the incremental cost way down, that's not a crazy buy. I don't know. I'm trying to take the other side because I think everybody on LinkedIn is basically saying Joby is crazy for doing this deal. And while I think I agree, I'm trying to find the rationale behind the number making sense.
Well, I think it's one less thing on their to-do list, like that piece of it, how to build out a market and a brand and all those other things that takes a lot of that off the table. And it is an acqui-hire. Rob has kind of positioned himself in this space, this kind of short transfer space. So yeah, but from a financial perspective, like how do we actually get to this valuation number? I don't know. And also Blade has raised over $170 million when they went SPAC. So at this point, I guess there's some residual value of the Strata organization versus what Blade was worth. I just really wonder, like, as an investor, how do they feel, especially the big folks who put in a lot of money that were, expecting Blade to be, I think it was like an $850 million valuation. Things have changed significantly, but also things had to change, and at least someone knew to pivot and someone got a deal done. So I can't fault them there.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. I'm looking here. Today is August 5th. Q2 earnings come out today.
They were negative EBITDA.
Yeah, we're recording before earnings come out. Stock is down, but I mean, it popped yesterday on this news. I think the real winner here is Joby, and I think I've had a couple of interesting conversations on the eVTOL, and I think if you zoom out and you look at what Joby's doing from an acquisition standpoint, I mean, there's a whole defense side of Joby that is pretty muted, talked about. There's information out there. I'm not like busting any confidentiality clauses, but I think that the industry experts that I've talked to in this space over the years have all kind of come to the consensus that this is a winner take all market. Like, there's going to be a big player and there's not going to be a lot of little players. And so you have all of these companies that are jockeying for position to be, and even if it's not winner take all, it may be winner take most. So you have these companies that are capitalized in these extreme ways to try and just gobble market share, similar to how you saw in software. And so I think that, Joby being the hard tech, right? There's, something behind it. Venture money is going there. Public money is going there. I think there's an opportunity for Joby to really be the, $1 million gorilla in the room. And that's what they're betting on. So frankly, does overpaying by a few turns for Blade, does that change anything for you? It may not even matter.
No, also it's paper. There may be no cash that changes hands. I don't know if that's the case or not. It says they can do either or, but if it's me and I'm trying to save cash, yeah, here's some shares.
Yep. And now you're going to have some more Blade medical. And that's, it means that Blade, I guess, now is going to look a lot more like other companies that are household names in the rotor space, right? Like, it's not going to, I think this is not definitive, but my perception here is that the kind of cool part of Blade, the thing that everybody thought was great and that investors got excited about, I think that's all moving on to Joby. And then Blade is left with blocking and tackling of being an organ and medical transplant company. And that's hard, but there's M&A activity in there. There's interest there. There's chances for disruption. I mean, it's a different business than what they've been in, but they're not out of business.
No. And I think too, it depends on how the calculations work out the end, but there should be a lot of cash left over in Strata. I think, you've got the financials, but I want to say it was around $120 million in cash and cash equivalents left in the company, because they were supposed to go on this acquisition spree post-SPAC, but there weren't a lot of companies to acquire that kind of fit what they were doing. So Strata should technically be in a great position if they keep most of the cash, continue to grow that organ business and do well there. But yeah, it's a interesting deal for sure in many different ways and iterations.
Yeah, 200 million in capital. Much of this will come from 125 million in cash and stock that Joby is paying to acquire Blade's pasture operations, albeit with 35 million held back, subject to certain performance milestones. Yada yada yada.
Okay.
That's according to AIN. So they've got some cash. They can go start to grow that, and they can um, they can continue on. Rob Weisenthal, I believe, goes with the new company or with kind of into Joby
Into
and
Joby.
leaves behind Melissa Tom Keel. The Strata business has significant growth potential driven by technology progress that is increasing the potential for organ transplants. So they're betting on organ transplants continuing to be needed. I think that's probably a solid bet. I mean, I can see the argument there. But there's been more M&A activity. So to pivot, so we don't run out of time, because Jessie and I could talk about this all day. There's more M&A activity. A lot in the last 7 days since we last saw you, listener. There has been some more FBO M&A activity.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is great news for everybody. We're all happy to see. I mean, look, the FlexJet deal, now this Blade deal, like there's movement. It's exciting. Maybe the industry is like starting to get like its groove back. But FBOs and MROs have always, been more active. But even in the last week, we're seeing a lot more. So Jet Aviation, a General Dynamics company, they've acquired an FBO at Paris Le Bourget, which is where the famous Paris Air Show is held. Also in Burbank, there's things happening. I think it's really good news. I think it's a positive sign for the economy overall. And also just for aviation in general, I think we're heading in a positive direction.
Yeah, the three big ones right now is Jet Aviation. They purchased Aston Sky FBO in Paris. That's a pretty big one for those that aren't in kind of the management world. Jet is a General Dynamics big player in FBO world. Burbank FBO ends a 22-year millionaire brand partnership, which is not necessarily M&A news, but it means that there is still interest in these FBO brands, and in that, millionaire chief brand officer Allison Woolsey said the Lee family has been an important and cherished part of the millionaire story. While transitions like these are never easy, we understand and respect their decision to step into a new chapter that honors their family legacy. We're grateful for the decades of partnership. We have every confidence that Priscilla and her team will continue to deliver exceptional service. So a family kind of taking back the FBO. Aero Centers, which is, kind of has some PE backing to it. They added Shelter Lakeland FBO, which Lakeland Linder, by the way, which is where Sun and Fun is. If you've never been there, like Lakeland's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I mean, but there's a lot of activity happening. I mean, if you're gonna buy an FBO, a Shelter FBO there, that's pretty interesting. But it means Aero Centers is the sole FBO provider at Lakeland Linder, and they have more than 30 acres, 125,000 square feet of hangar and office space. You know my favorite part about Lakeland Linder, Jessie?
What?
Have you been to Sun and Fun in the last couple of years? I don't know if you've ever even actually been to Sun and Fun.
I've not, no.
My favorite part is the middle of the day. The air show's going. You've got the Red Bull guys flipping, and Aerostar. You got everybody doing cool, and then all of a sudden it gets really quiet. And nothing's happening, and you're like, why did it get quiet? What's happening next? And sure enough, here comes Prime Air rolling down the runway. Is going to take off real quick, and then they keep going with the air show. So Amazon dominates that airport right now.
Interesting.
In terms of traffic, they have a lot of aircraft that go in and out of there. That's one of my favorite parts of Lakeland Linder is kind of during Sun and Fun, the pause, and we're all going to wait for Jeff Bezos to send some packages, and then we're going to continue on.
Well, I have to do one quick shout out though for Lakeland though, because my dad was controller of the year at Sun and something years ago at this point. So shout out, Dad. He says his name is listed somewhere on a Howard Johnson plaque somewhere.
Well, we are so proud of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we so that's good news for the M&A and FBOs. One, I don't know if it's good or if it's bad, but you do have NetJets. An arbitrator blocks NetJets sale of Columbus maintenance facility.
Yes.
And this was one that you brought up. The article is in Private Jet Card Comparisons by Doug Golan on July 1st, 2025. So walk us through what happened here. Some blocked M&A.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, it's an arbitration, so a lot of this, isn't out there in the open. But this is one of those things when you're transacting and you're, one of the first questions is, oh, is your team unionized or not? Because this is the kind of stuff that happens. So NetJets, they did a big collective bargaining agreement, not only with their pilots, but also mechanics, over the last few years. So I don't know what all went down. So NetJets was trying to sell this facility to SA Aero Invest, who also owns a lot of other aviation companies in our space. But there's 200 workers there, and the Teamsters got involved and won this arbitration against NetJets, blocking the deal. If I had to guess, probably the deal will go forward at some point, but it will mean SA Aero Invest has to take on the pieces of that collective bargaining agreement, including not making people move, preserving their jobs for a certain amount of time. So there's a lot to this, but man, yeah, if you're trying to sell and you've got union positions, it just makes everything a little bit more difficult and a little harder to do.
To bring this all full circle, who else does SA Aero Invest own? None other than Aero Centers FBOs, who we talked about earlier. So they're on the buying spree. They also own Go Rentals. They own Ground Operation Software NDX and SAR Trilogy Management, which says it was founded to invest in and partner with aviation, transport, logistics, and travel businesses. Michael Shearinga has a long history in aviation. Vice President of U.S. Airways, CEO of Flight Options from 2004 to 2008. Who do we know is at Flight Options? None other than Ken Rickey. And then President of FBO Network's Signature Flight Support, 2009 to 2012, for moving to parent company BBA Aviation as President and CEO of Flight Support. If you haven't read it, I'm going to go ahead and link it. If you have no idea how all of that is related, it's incredibly related. I wrote a really deep dive in M&A and aviation activity, and that guy's resume touches almost every company that I wrote about. So I will link that in the newsletter so that you can read it. If you're a nerd like me that likes to kind of draw some, that likes to draw some parallels here, this guy is basically, he is the M&A CEO. And I would imagine them to continue to stay hyperactive in the M&A space.
It's a very, very small world. So once you see those names, they usually pop up somewhere else. Also a good reason to always stay friends with everybody and make sure you have good relationships out there. But speaking of not being friends, the DC crash hearings are going on, and NTSB is mad at FAA. FAA is mad at the military. Everybody's mad at everybody and pointing fingers all around for what happened.
Yeah. So Jessie and I were having a conversation over the weekend about this, which is kind of why we brought it up. There is a whole lot of uncertainty around what the heck is going on or what actually happened when it comes to the crash. So if you go look, AIN has a couple of stories about this. AINonline.com has a few articles talking about these different hearings. There's a whole lot of political speak, but if you double click through a lot of the, I'm not going to get busted for this, I think it tells a really interesting story.
Yeah, ADSB is at the heart of this. Obviously, we all, we know now that the military is turning on ADSB when they fly, which, shocker, probably should have already been happening for a long time. But it's also bringing up the debate between ADSB in and ADSB out. ADSB in has been mandatory since 2020. Everyone is supposed to have it, particularly when you're flying in commercial airspace. But this is also bringing up Chairman Homendy. She's now saying, hey, we should also have ADSB in the aircraft. I'm sorry, I said ADSB out. It's ADSB out, everyone has. ADSB in is what Homendy is now saying everyone should have. And that's your ability to see all the airplanes around you, see and avoid, in case air traffic control doesn't. But there's also a debate going on whether does air traffic control even need ADSB information, because technically speaking, radar should be more accurate than ADSB in the first place.
Yep, that's exactly right. So there's an article in that I referenced. ADSB issues didn't hamper ATC and DCA midair collision. To distill the whole thing down, essentially the argument is that they have this really great radar, so ATC should have been able to see it. The problem is that even if ADS, I think if you distill it down, and I mean this in a respectful way, but in the fact that I'm a half degree separated from a couple of folks that were killed in this accident. And so it's really frustrating when we're going to all sit here and point fingers and not say, but here's what happened. NDSB investigator Van McKinney asked Andy DeForest, U.S. Army commander of the Army Aviation Brigade, about the 12th Battalion's policy for the use of ADSB out at the time of the accident. So they turned off ADSB out in order to have these maneuvers, but then they're going to rely on ATC to keep the separation. Well, ATC may have this great radar technology, but by God, they did not keep the separation. And that, I think, is the core of the problem, is that We have a system that encourages people to point fingers at each other and not take accountability for what happened. I think if you distill it all the way down, we have to get to the bottom of what happened so that it doesn't happen again. Whether that is that you can't fly Army helicopters up underneath some of the busiest airspace in the United States without ADSB out, or you're going to overstaff when that is happening in ATC so that you have somebody watching them the whole time. At the bottom of all of this is that a lot of people lost their lives. Now all we can do is point fingers at each other. Somebody take ownership. Tell us what happened. And I think that the American people, because of how many everyday Americans this affected, are owed the right to know what happened.
And I think all of the above, because we've had such a tragic loss of life, I think everyone take responsibility for their piece of it and make the changes. You know, the military needs to get ADSB out and in on at all times. There's no reason not to be doing it unless it's a covert op. You know, air traffic control, they should improve their technology. Every single pilot out there shouldn't have a problem with ADSB in being put on their aircraft because, quite frankly, it's not that expensive and it's not that new of technology. So let's just all get it together.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll link a couple of the articles of the of kind of where we're at. It's not resolved, but there is kind of some ongoing hearing. I mean, you've got some legislation that's kind of been floating around this issue, kind of as a direct response to this. I think it's important for everybody, the NTSB, the FAA, and for Congress to come together and say, look, we're going to work together. We're not going to point fingers. We're all going to only point fingers at ourselves and say, here's how we messed up in this situation. Here's how we're going to fix it and move forward. But by God, it's the government, and the government does nothing better than just create chaos and hurdles and point fingers at each other. Hopefully, you know, somebody in Washington will step up. It's looking like they might, but I hope that just continues.
Yeah, and we'll keep updating you. We're going to call this our DCA hearing watch as things get updated. Some other quick highlights before we let you go for the week. The Fly Alliance lawsuit that was recently mentioned was dropped. There was an accusation that they were running a legal charter and, you know, promised something they couldn't deliver. That's been gotten rid of with prejudice. So good for Fly Alliance for taking care of that. It took 2 years. Also, fortunately, Brazil seems to be skating by with no aviation tariffs. All positive news for aviation on those fronts, and hopefully things continue on that path.
Yeah, we shall see. In a week that we thought might be slow ended up being busy. So next week, it'll probably be even busier. But if you are almost to your destination, we hope that you arrive safely. The VIP seat is designed for your morning commute, so it's around 30 minutes. Share it with your aviation friends. It would mean a whole lot to us. I've had a couple of listeners reach out to me on LinkedIn recently, and that has been a lot. I really appreciate it. Share stuff, send it to your friends. This is a niche topic. So this is not to be sent to your grandma, or you can send it to my grandma. I'd be like, look, you know, Preston's on the show, but my grandma's probably the only grandma who listens. Hi, Mom. And share it with your business aviation friends. Like us on YouTube. Subscribe to the newsletter at thevipseat.com. You can find out more about Jessie and her nonprofit at flyingprivate.org. You can find out more about me at prestonholland.com or prestigefinance.com. This is the VIP seat, August 6th. We're out.